Some people say you should never meet your heroes. I've spent many years with Bachmann steam locomotives, hoping one day to be able to afford a Broadway Limited imports model, as I've always been led to believe that BLI was the epitome of high-quality, feature-loaded HO-scale motive power. That dream came true when I found a screaming deal on this used Broadway Limited 280. It had some damage to the valve gear, but I was able to repair it, and now I'm faced with the question of whether it's actually worth twice the price of Bachmann's very similar 280, which I reviewed a couple of years ago. At first glance, the BLI model is quite similar to the Bachmann. It's a generic North American 280, the size and proportions are similar, and they have about the same level of detail. Both have lots of separately applied piping, a full cab interior with crew figures, working Walschaerts valve gear, and all the rivets you can count. The BLI model does have a few extra touches, such as real coal in the tender, but overall it's hard to see exactly where all that extra money is going. Now, although this is the first BLI model I've owned, it's not the first one to visit this layout. I made a video of their brass hybrid Challenger almost 3 years ago when I was working for BC Hobbies. Overall, I was quite impressed with it, but it did have a few annoying quirks that are shared with this model and presumably most other BLI products. My biggest complaint is the quality of the sound. The word paragon is usually defined as the best possible version of something, but Broadway's use of it as the name for their sound system is optimistic at best. Despite this engine having 2 speakers, the frequency response is all mids, with no bass or treble to speak of, and the actual fidelity of the sound is about on par with one of those singing birthday cards. At normal running speed, each chuff sharply cuts off the previous one, bringing to mind that weird reverse drum sound from Strawberry Fields Forever. The motor control is also pretty poor, and even after numerous attempts, I couldn't get it to smoothly accelerate from a stop without bucking and hesitating. I also had to remove the traction tires because they were lifting the middle pairs of drivers off the rail, leaving the engine with precious little electrical pickup, and it kept stalling at random points around the layout. It still pulls perfectly fine without them, which does raise the question of why it had traction tires in the first place. But the quirkiest part of this model by far is the smoke unit. However, I can't give BLI too much grief for that, because all smoke units, especially at HO scale, are notoriously finicky. It only produces a decent amount of smoke when it has exactly the right amount of fluid in it, and the smoke output is the only way to tell how much fluid's in it. Weak smoke output could mean it's overfilled, or it could mean it's empty. It also clogs every couple of minutes and has to be cleared out by blowing sharply down the stack, which in turn makes a mess of smoke fluid all over the inside of the smoke box door. I did manage to get some pretty good smoke out of it, but only for a minute or two at a time, and I had to keep chasing it around, constantly refilling it and blowing down the stack. It's capable of working pretty well, but most of the time it's more trouble than it's worth. Now, I don't want you to get the impression that I don't like this model, because there actually is a lot to appreciate about it. The wires between the engine and tender are much thicker than Bachmann's, and hopefully won't break as easily. The marker lights are functional, which looks really cool in the dark, and there's also a light in the cab that comes on whenever the engine is stopped and goes off again when it starts moving. It runs beautifully smooth and quiet with the sound turned off, and the mechanism is a nice, simple, reliable gear drive, none of that weird Bachmann belt business. It even handles my less than perfect track work with no issues. Now, this model is lettered for the Sioux line, which leads to the very reasonable question, is it an accurate model of any particular Sioux line locomotive? Well, no. But it's actually not as far off as I expected. The model is based on a Pennsylvania Railroad H10 class, with the Belpaire firebox removed to make it less obviously Pennsy. With a bit of modification, it could be a passable stand-in for the real Sioux line 459. The proportions would still be a little on the chunky side, but with some tweaks to the headlight, tender, and valve gear, you'd be hard-pressed to notice the difference. So, all things considered, do I think this is a good locomotive, and should you buy it? Well, the answer to the first question is yes, I do think it's good. It obviously has its quirks, like they all do, but it also has a lot of potential, and replacing the sound decoder with a better one, such as TCS Wow Sound, would solve 90% of its problems. The second question we'll get to in a few minutes, but overall, this is honestly a pretty sweet little engine. Ultimately, I can't really find a whole lot wrong with this engine. It's a handsome, smooth-running model that looks at home on pretty much any North American railroad, and it's exactly the sort of small, versatile steam locomotive that the HO market is sorely lacking nowadays. There's plenty of detail, the mechanism runs superbly, the smoke is a fun novelty, and the sound, well, it's there. The one big problem with the Broadway Limited 280 is that the Bachmann 280 exists. They're both very similar, they have similar levels of detail, they're close enough to match a lot of the same prototypes, they both run well, and most importantly, the Bachmann is significantly less expensive, and you can buy a plain DC version and install whatever sound decoder you want. The Broadway Limited is a perfectly decent model, but it's just not worth twice as much as the Bachmann. Broadway Limited has recently started offering plain DC versions of some of their models, and they're doing another production run of these 280s soon, but on their website I couldn't find any evidence that they're going to do a plain DC 280. All of the listings seem to have the Paragon sound. If you can find a damaged one for a major discount and repair it like I did, then it's a perfectly nice little engine. However, if you just want an HO scale 280 and don't care if it's this exact one, you can get far better value for your money with the Bachmann and sleep soundly in the knowledge that you're not missing much. And neither am I, because after all said and done, I've decided to sell this engine. I do like it and I've enjoyed my time with it, but if I was going to keep it, I'd really want to put a better sound decoder in it, which would be at least another $100. Whereas if I sell it, I can make enough money to buy a Bachmann 280, install a better sound decoder in it, and probably still have some left over. Anyway folks, thanks for watching, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.